This is the History of Portugal podcast, an Eat to My Own Beat podcast. New episodes every Friday. Check us out on our Facebook page, the History of Portugal podcast, on YouTube, as well as my website, www.eattomyownbeat.com.
Today, we're diving into the 1383 to 1385 Portuguese interregnum, a 2-year period that determined whether Portugal would remain independent or be absorbed by Castile. You'll understand how a succession crisis sparked Portugal's first national resistance movement, why the merchants of Lisbon became unlikely kingmakers, and how this period established a dynasty that would rule for nearly 200 years. Let me bring in someone who can help us understand how a bastard prince became Portugal's savior.
So we're talking about one of the most dramatic succession crises in medieval Europe. In 1383, King Ferdinand I of Portugal is dying, and from his marriage to Leonor Teles de Menezes, only Princess Beatrice survived.
Just one daughter? That's a problem in medieval politics, right?
Exactly. And here's where it gets complicated. Her marriage was literally the major political issue of the day, since it would determine the future of the kingdom. Several political factions lobbied for possible husbands, including English and French princes.
So this is like medieval Game of Thrones, basically.
Pretty much. But Ferdinand settled for his wife's first choice, King John I of Castile. Now here's the irony. Ferdinand had waged 3 wars against Castile during his reign, and this marriage was supposed to end hostilities by uniting the 2 crowns.
Wait, so he fought Castile for years and then basically handed them his kingdom through marriage?
That's exactly what it looked like to the Portuguese nobles. The dynastic union meant Portugal would lose independence to Castile, and many nobles were fiercely opposed to that possibility.
But they weren't united, were they? Like, opposition without organization doesn't usually work.
Right, they weren't united under a common pretender to the crown. There were 2 candidates, both illegitimate half-brothers of Ferdinand. First was John, son of Peter I of Portugal and Inés de Castro, but he lived in Castile.
So one potential Portuguese king was literally living in enemy territory?
Exactly. The other candidate was John, great Master of Avis, another natural son of Peter I. According to the page content, he was very popular among the Portuguese middle class and traditional aristocracy.
Okay, so we have 2 Johns, both illegitimate, but one's in Castile and one's actually in Portugal with popular support. That seems like an obvious choice.
You'd think so, but here's where things get really dramatic. On October 22, 1383, King Ferdinand died. According to the marriage contract, dower Queen Leonor assumed regency in the name of her daughter Beatrice and son-in-law John I of Castile.
So suddenly Portugal is being ruled by a Castilian king through a regency. That must have been terrifying for Portuguese independence.
Absolutely. And here's a crucial detail. The regent's privy council made the error of excluding any representation of the merchants of Lisbon. These were powerful economic players being shut out of political decisions.
That's fascinating because it shows how economic power was demanding political representation. Like, centuries before modern democracy, merchants are saying, we have a stake in this.
Exactly. And the page content tells us that excluded from the decision-making process, the merchants of Lisbon voiced their dissent, aligning with John of Avis and his supporters.
So the economic backbone of the kingdom is now backing the illegitimate prince. But how does this turn into actual action?
This is where we get to that murder I mentioned. The assassination of João Fernandes Andeiro, the detested lover of Dowager Queen Leonor, by a group led by John of Avis, marked the beginning of a full-scale opposition movement.
Wait, so John of Avis personally led the assassination of the Queen's lover? That's incredibly bold.
According to Britannica, John had been persuaded by a group of young nationalists, led by Nuno Álvares Pereira, to murder this Galician count. Popular support was immediately stirred up for John, and Queen Leonor fled from Lisbon, appealing to Castile for help.
So one assassination basically triggers a full-scale civil war. And who's this, Nuno Álvares Pereira? He sounds important.
Nuno Álvares Pereira becomes absolutely crucial. The page content describes him as a nobleman and military commander who became a national hero for his role in the conflict. He's basically John of Avis's right-hand man and military genius.
Okay, so now we have open rebellion. What happens next? Does Castile just, invade?
Pretty much. In May 1384, Castilian armies besieged John in Lisbon. But here's what's remarkable. According to Britannica, the outbreak of plague forced them to withdraw in September.
Disease saves the day? That's not something you can plan for.
Right, but the Portuguese weren't just sitting around waiting for luck. The conflict escalated when the Castilian army clashed with forces loyal to John of Avis in the Battle of Atoleiros in 1384.
And how did that go? I'm guessing the Portuguese held their own?
According to the page content, Nuno Alvarez Pereira's forces defeated a larger Castilian army using innovative tactics. While the battle didn't produce a decisive outcome, it showed the Portuguese could fight.
Innovative tactics against a larger army, that sounds like classic underdog strategy. But I imagine Castile wasn't giving up that easily.
No, they laid siege to Lisbon, cutting off the city from its lifeline. The page content describes how, amidst famine and the looming threat of conquest, a Portuguese fleet managed to break the blockade and deliver essential supplies.
So Lisbon is under siege, people are starving, but somehow they break through? That's incredible resilience.
It really shows the determination. And here's where international politics comes in. In 1385, the arrival of English troops, veterans of the 100 Years' War, injected fresh vigor into the Portuguese forces.
English troops? So this isn't just a Portuguese civil war anymore, it's becoming part of the broader European conflict.
Exactly. The page content shows this was part of the 100 Years' War, with England supporting Portugal and France, Aragon, and even Genoese volunteers supporting Castile.
So Portugal's independence struggle becomes a proxy war between England and France. That really raises the stakes.
And here's the political masterstroke. A meeting of the Cortes in Coimbra proclaimed John of Avis as the 10th King of Portugal, boldly defying the claims of John I of Castile.
Wait, so they just declared him king, even though there's still a war going on?
That's medieval politics for you. According to Britannica, in April 1385, representatives of the three estates met in the Cortes of Coimbra, and after demonstrating that King Pedro's elder surviving sons had not been legitimized, John was elected king.
So they're basically saying we choose legitimacy over bloodline. That's actually pretty progressive for the 14th century.
And the page content tells us the cities of Lisbon and Porto and the merchants and trade guilds enthusiastically backed him, though much of the older nobility still favored the Castilian succession.
So it's not just about royal blood, it's about who has popular support and economic backing. But declaring yourself king is one thing, actually becoming king is another.
Right, and that's where the Battle of Aljubarrota comes in. According to the page content, this was a decisive victory for the Portuguese in 1385, solidifying John of Avis's claim to the throne.
Aljubarrota, that sounds like the moment everything changed. What made this battle so decisive?
The page content describes it as John's victory during the Battle of Aljubarrota that ended the interregnum when he was crowned in 1385. It was the moment that secured Portuguese independence from Castile.
And this is where John I becomes, well, actually John I. But what's the broader significance here? Like, why does this matter beyond just Portuguese history?
This is huge. Robert Durand considers this era as the great revealer of national consciousness. The Portuguese interpret this as their earliest national resistance movement to counter Castilian intervention.
So this isn't just about who gets to be king, it's about the birth of Portuguese national identity. That's actually profound.
And here's what's remarkable. The page content notes that the bourgeoisie and the nobility worked together to establish the Avis Dynasty. That contrasted with the lengthy civil wars in France and England, where aristocratic factions fought against centralized monarchy.
Wait, so while France and England are tearing themselves apart with civil wars, Portugal actually unites different social classes? That's the opposite of what you'd expect.
Exactly. The page content specifically mentions this contrast with the 100 Years' War in France and the War of the Roses in England. Portugal found unity where others found division.
And what happens to this new dynasty? Does John I actually manage to hold on to power?
Oh, absolutely. According to the page content, the House of Avis ruled Portugal from 1385 until 1580. That's nearly 200 years. And John I's reign lasted from 1385 until his death in 1433, which was 48 years.
48 years? That's an incredibly long reign for medieval times. He must have done something right.
The page content tells us his long reign saw the beginning of Portugal's overseas expansion. The House of Avis would flourish during the Renaissance and the period of Portuguese discoveries, when Portugal expanded its power globally.
So this crisis that almost destroyed Portugal actually sets the stage for Portugal becoming a global empire. That's an incredible transformation.
And it established important international relationships. The page content mentions the signing of the Treaty of Windsor, strengthening the Anglo-Portuguese alliance and kickstarting the so-called illustrious generation.
The illustrious generation, that sounds like Portugal's golden age was just beginning. But let me ask you this. What if John of Avis had failed? What if Castile had won?
Portugal would have ceased to exist as an independent nation. We wouldn't have had the Age of Discoveries, no Portuguese Empire, no Brazil as we know it. The entire trajectory of world history would have been different.
So when you step back from all this, what we're really looking at is how a succession crisis became a defining moment for an entire nation. The merchants demanding representation, the nobles choosing legitimacy over bloodline, different social classes uniting against foreign domination.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is how this contrasts with what was happening elsewhere in Europe. While France and England were fragmenting into civil wars, Portugal found a way to unite around a shared sense of national identity.
It shows that sometimes the greatest threats can become the greatest opportunities. Portugal faced extinction and instead discovered what it meant to be Portuguese.
And the legacy lasted for centuries. The House of Avis didn't just survive, it thrived, establishing Portugal as a global power and creating a dynasty that would shape the modern world.
You know what strikes me most about this story? It started with an illegitimate son murdering the Queen's lover, and it ended with the birth of a nation. Sometimes history really is stranger than fiction.
Thank you for listening to the History of Portugal podcast, a Eat to My Own Beat podcast. New episodes every Friday. Get more information on the History of Portugal podcast on Facebook, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out www.eattomyownbeat.com for more information on our travels.